So hello everyone, my name is Isabelle. I'll be the moderator and the announcer this morning. I am part of Portland DSA. I've been a member for almost a year now. I'm in the Organize for Power caucus, and I'm also a Medicare for All regional organizer for the state of Oregon and Idaho. I'll be talking about some of the strikes that we've been doing recently, or some fundraising and support that we've been doing recently. The Nabisco Strike was a month-long strike, and Kaiser, for the nurses, they ended up not going on a strike, but they had a tentative agreement just before. Also the Fred Meyer strike. And the city of Portland, they are scheduled to go on strike on the 10th. Their contract ended in 2020, so they've actually been in negotiations for over 19 months now, but they might be able to vote Tuesday night if they decide to go with that new agreement. So they might not end up going on strike, but we'll see on Tuesday night or on Wednesday. The first person who's going to be talking today is Jonah Furman. Let's see, he's a labor organizer and a journalist. He's a reporter for Labor Notes, which is an organizing center for the troublemakers wing of the labor union or labor movement. Jonah publishes Who Gets the Bird, a weekly update on organizing, contract campaigns, strikes, and all things union in the USA. Jonah is a past director of the union members for Bernie, political and labor organizer for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and on the board of the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, a joint project of the Democratic Socialists of America and the United Electoral Workers Union, and a member of DSA, and he's located in Washington, D.C. Here's Jonah.
Thanks. I was invited to say a few words to this meeting, and I'm glad to see a lot of people I know in attendance and a lot of people I don't know, and excited to see everything that's happening in Portland over the past few months now. So I was going to just say a few words. I have some notes here about partly about strikes in general, the labor movement in general, socialists, and why we care about this stuff. My expertise is not really expertise. I work for Labor Notes. I spend my time talking to union members who are on strike, want to go on strike, trying to get their union ready to go on strike, trying to bring more people into their union. So I spend a lot of time talking to people who are interested in a different vision of the labor movement and a different vision of society and how the unions have a role to play there. And so I'll say a few words on that, and then excited to stick around for the discussion here. So things I'm going to talk about are strikes in general, the Democratic Socialist movement, and if I have to use terminology like class formation, the task we have right now in the US in 2022 with the labor movement we have and the context we're in. And my hope is to help people think beyond the formula, strikes are good because we hate the boss, which is a great formula. It's very useful, but there's more to think about in terms of our movement and the labor movement. So the first thing I just wanted to think about is, why do socialists care about strikes? Obviously, huge thing is fighting the boss, is just the sort of resentment and anger and domination, exploitation that happens at work, and just supporting that sort of outpouring, that action against that kind of domination. Some of it is about winning economic gains, right? We want to see a 3% raise, a 10% raise, a 20% raise. But there's also a limit to that stuff, right? We don't think, for the most part, if you think about it, there's just not enough union density. There's not enough sort of strike power that you're going to undo the entire system where people take, you get your, the profit you make for your company is being taken away from you every day. You're not going to strike your way out of that. And the density we have is not going to be such that it's going to reverse economic inequality on a social level in this country. So you could have a great big strike and it's probably not going to undo the massive amounts of income inequality we have. There's going to take more than sort of just some individual strikes, especially local fights that are important to the people who are in them, but might not be big enough to sort of change the whole system we're talking about. So I just wanted to say one of the things that are important about strikes is not just those economic wins, but it's something like the way it transforms the people who strike, who fight. A lot of, the reason why this stuff matters is because the fight creates fighters, creates people who've been through something, who've fought for their own interest. Most of the time, people who've never fought for anything with a political valence or never had the occasion to collectively do something against the interests of the status quo in society at all, let alone against their boss. One thing we talk about at Labor Notes is this sort of four-part conception of campaigns, right? Is it widely felt? Is it deeply felt? Is it winnable? And does it build the union is how we usually talk about it. But you can think about this in terms of sort of the base for class politics in this country, for democratic socialism in this country. And strikes fit those really well, widely felt. Everyone in the workplace has to be more or less on board for this to work, even if they're not an activist or a steward or something like that. Deeply felt, yes, it's deeply felt. You're going to miss your paycheck. You're going to risk your job for whatever the cause is of the strike. Winnable, this is an important thing. Strikes are, and I'll come back to this, but they are usually somewhat time limited. They're about certain issues that the boss has some control over intervening on. And building the union or building the movement, this is the key thing I'm trying to talk about, is strikes create people who are then open to their own confidence as a worker, open to their own confidence as someone challenging the status quo. They said, I fought before, I can fight again. I could join an organization that is interested in expanding these fights into other arenas. So not only for the next strike will I be ready, but you hear people talk about, I hear Teamsters talk about the UPS strike in 1997, which was now, whatever, how long ago is that? 20 some years ago. And they talk about how that changed them forever. And they're an activist forever because they were on strike for 15 days in 1997. And you hear this about almost every strike. There's some experience, even in losing strikes, that it has changed people. So why is that important? Part of briefly, I want to say these few words about class formation. People have different words for this. I'm not like a theory person. I'm not talking about theory. I'm talking about the idea that we're living in a context where the working class, as a self-conscious group of people who have the same interests and are sort of associated with one another, you walk down the street and nod your head because you feel you're both part of the working class. We have sort of lost a lot of this over decades. It's been a project of the corporate US, it's been a project of capitalism, but so it's baked into the capitalist project to disorganize the working class and say, you're not really a group, you don't have the same interests, and they're not really opposed to ours, and you're not all together to do it. We're sort of at the end of 40 years, maybe it's the end of decades of dismantling of the institutions and organizations and movements that, formed that working class. So you can talk about explicit things like COINTELPRO destroying like Black liberation movements. You can also talk about Reagan busting the air traffic controllers. There's a lot of sort of places in history when you can say these were the ways in which the working class organizations and sort of self-conscious presence was dismantled. But I think if you're trying to think strategically right now, 2022, and look at the labor movement, you have to sort of accept that we are at the tail end of a dismantling that wasn't totally successful, but was really quite successful. I mean, you can look at absolute number of union members, you can look at the percentage of workers who are union members. There's a smaller social base for these explicit working class politics. The reason the unions are such a good one is because of what I said before about fights and fighters. The unions are set up to fight and then cohere that energy between fights. There's not a lot of other organizations that can do that. We want DSA to be that. We want other sort of social institutions of working class people to be that. Sometimes they can fulfill that function, but the unions are structurally, working class organizations in the working class's interest that are set up to do some kind of fighting and set up to keep things going in between the fights. So I bring that up because I just think it's worth sort of thinking about what does it mean to look for strikes, support strikes, want to put gasoline on strikes so they get bigger and they are more powerful and they win in the time that we're facing. And one sort of example I like to look at about why it's not just about sort of, how big is the strike and how many strikes are there, although that's an important metric, is Striketober, right? Where are we right now? There was a few months ago this phenomenon called Striketober, October 2021. And the thing that I think is interesting in thinking about, what was important about this, you can look at the numbers, and I think it's worth looking at the numbers. Even just 2 years before Striketober, October 2021, there's October 2019, where there's more than 3 times more workers on strike. You have GM on strike, you have the Chicago Teachers Union on strike, you have important big industries and prominent unions on strike in 2019 in October. It doesn't get called Striketober. And the cynical view is sort of, that's hype, right? That was like fluff. For some reason, the media took it up. But if you talk to workers who struck in this time, I talked to a lot of John Deere workers, for example, and during Striketober, and other people who were talking about striking. There was these Teamsters. I heard this from a Teamster bus driver in Reno, Nevada. They struck 3 times between July and October of last year. And what they said is, this is Striketober. We're part of something. It's connected to the pandemic. It's connected to Congress. It's connected. So when you talk about this deeply felt thing and this creating a social base for democratic socialist politics or some kind of political articulation beyond my boss sucks, which is an important place to start from. Striketober and this whole idea that you can connect strikes to bigger social things happening is really important to understand and is part of what strike support, strike solidarity, social support for strikes is about. You're trying to show the people who are on strike, who might just be 50 people, might be 1,200 city workers in Portland, might be, even if it's 300,000 Teamsters at UPS, there's still going to be a need to say, not just we support you, but this fight is somehow connected. And how that happens is through direct connections between people who are not on strike and people who are on strike. And it's like the task of the public support is both to win the strike by putting pressure on the boss, the company, saying everybody's watching, there's public pressure on you. But more than that, I think, is to connect the strike to other fights through people like you, through democratic socialist activists who are personally in touch with members and leaders of those strikes. So maybe that's all really basic, but I do think it's really worth pointing out. I know Portland's different. You guys are like on fire. There's all these strikes, but if you look at the country, most places do not have an active picket line. They're not going to have an active picket line in 6 months. I was looking at NLRB data for Wyoming. There's been 4 union elections in Wyoming in 5 years. There's not every place that's going to be a hotbed of this stuff, but the general concept here, I mean, the strike is important because it's the time of heightened consciousness when people are in it, they're fighting right now. But things like strikes, where people are going up against their boss in the union setting, happen all the time. Every contract expiration is some kind of referendum on what your relationship is with your boss. Every time a new union is formed, there's some sort of conversation around this. So I know a lot of the people on this call are from Portland, but I didn't want to keep these remarks just totally general and theoretical. I wanted to say, a few suggestions for, maybe they apply in Portland, maybe you guys have already done this stuff. But I think it's really important for DSA, for small chapters, big chapters, to take a few lessons from what Portland has done and from strike support in general, even if you don't think there's a strike in your town next week. So one lesson I wanted to highlight is just, you don't know where the next fight is coming from. And your job is to know. Your job is to know every union in your city, every potential labor fight in your town, in your industry, like the back of your hand. Union members who are really involved, who are stewards, they know. And your job is to get up to speed. Is there a contract expiration happening next week? Did you know, for example, that 30,000 oil and gas workers are working under a 24-hour rolling extension since last week in a bunch of the Gulf Coast and in California? Nobody pays attention to this stuff. But when those workers go, this is the second lesson, you have to be ready. You can't be like, it happened and last week and now it's over and I missed it and good job going on strike. There's these brief moments where people are on. It's like a light bulb where they're willing to say, man, I'm questioning my boss's authority over me and how much I get paid and what it's like to have a job in this country. And you want to be talking to those people now when that's happening. So what that concretely means is making connections. The main thing is to be in touch with, like, literally, if you're in a small town in Indiana, you should figure out what's your central labor council, what unions are in your town. Send a message to the president and try to find 5 members that you can become friends with. Like, just figure out what's up with the labor movement in your area. And it's everywhere. I mean, even in like South Carolina, the least union dense state, there's 50,000 union members. If 1% of them were into DSA, this would be a massive, a massive gain for the Democratic Socialist movement. So just to close, I would just say, like, if you're trying to think, what can I do to be like Portland, to help, you can't push a button and suddenly your city is on strike, but you should be mapping out your local labor movement, your local DSA chapter. If you have a labor branch, or just you should just go talk to as many of these union members you can find, ask them when their contract's up, what are the big issues? Do they think there's going to be a fight? Is it good at work? Is it bad at work? What's going on in their lives, in their workplace lives and in their unions? Another one is EWOC, as mentioned at the beginning. EWOC is this project of DSA and UE that's focused on the 90%, 94% in the private sector of workers who are non-union, who really don't have the resources to have a collective fight back. They happen often on individual levels. Hopefully we're seeing it more. The Starbucks stuff is really exciting. But EWOC is a way for anyone to get involved, get trained up as an organizer, talk to workers who are contacting EWOC every day saying, I want some help organizing for something at work. And if you're in a union and you want to talk about your union or organize in your union, I totally recommend reaching out to Labor Notes. You can reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat. And the summer, there is the Labor Notes conference, which, if you want to meet union activists and workplace activists across the country, is a great place to get some inspiration and make some connections. So those are my sort of big picture and small picture thoughts on this stuff. And thanks again for inviting me. And I'm just amazed by all the good work in Portland. So keep that up.
Great, thank you so much, Jonah. We're gonna have time for questions at the end, but for right now, we're gonna go on to Laura Wadlin. She's an instructor at Portland Community College and a secretary of the PCC FFAP. She was an organizer in the Nabisco, Kaiser, Fred Meyer, and City Worker Solidarity campaigns. She's a co-chair of Portland DSA and also a member of the Bread and Roses and Organize for Power caucuses. Here's Laura.
Hey everyone. So I really appreciate so much of what Jonah said, because you're going to hear some of these themes again in the tips that I'm going to give. And I really agree with what he said about how you really never know when a strike is going to happen. And a strike picket line isn't everywhere, but when it pops up, we need to be ready to take advantage of it as much as possible. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you so I can give you my rapid fire quick tips. So first, again, along the lines of what Jonah was saying, why do we do strike support? Why is it so important to engage in this? And the one sentence summary I give is, we need the labor movement and the labor movement needs us. So the labor movement is where working class people are most organized and most powerful. And we need the labor movement to show us how to fight, because working people are on the battlefield of class struggle every day, standing up to their bosses, and we need to show our members how to fight and that we can win with solidarity and struggle. And also the labor movement needs us because community campaigns as part of a contract campaign or a strike campaign that is a really important aspect that a lot of unions don't take advantage of. My union included. A lot of unions aren't used to activating the levers of community power, and DSA is one of the only organizations really equipped to mobilize with the strength that is necessary to make a strike have the impact that it needs to have to build class consciousness. So if you're doing strike support in your chapter or want to prepare, my number one tip is make connections ahead of the strike if possible. Like Jonah was saying, you have to do your research ahead of time. And if you learn about a contract that's expiring or a strike that's popped up, try to get in touch with that union. Certainly in some cases that's not going to work as well because people in that union are not as receptive or just aren't used to getting cold contacts from community members, right? And so that might not work out. And even if it doesn't, you should still show up to the picket line. But if at all possible, try to get in contact with someone in that union and let them know that you want to be a source of support. Second tip is get the scoop from trusted insiders. So I'm a big believer in the rank and file strategy. I'm not going to sit here and tell you to orient to the bureaucracy or staffers or top leadership as like your main priority. I certainly think that we should be orienting to the rank and file, to regular working class people. But the labor movement is confusing if you're not in a union, or even if you are in a union, but not in that union or that union. There are a lot of weird internal politics. There's turf, there's alphabet soup with the acronyms. There's all kinds of weird stuff. And if you can find someone who has been in the labor movement a long time or is a staffer or something like that, and they're friendly to DSA or they're a DSA member themselves, really treasure that person because they're going to help you navigate a lot of these tricky politics. Third tip is the most important one: go to the picket line and talk to strikers. If you don't remember anything else from this talk, you should remember this: go to the picket line and talk to strikers. And when you go to the picket line, you shouldn't prepare to just be standing around waving a sign. That's not really the point of going to a picket line. It's nice, but what you should be doing at the picket line is talking to people the whole time. That's the point of going to the picket line. So be prepared to introduce yourself and ask them lots of interesting questions about, like, oh, what are you doing? Why are you going on strike? Oh, we really support you and we want to be here to help, and solidarity, and what you're doing is amazing, and all that good stuff. Like you want to be there and show support, show positivity, and meet people and learn their name. That is the most important part. So when you talk to people, be a good representative for DSA and for your union. We want to be a source, like I said, of positivity. We want to be a source of like class agitation and tell them what their strike means to us politically. We understand that they are fighting the most powerful forces in society, and they are very brave for doing so. Most working people don't go on strike. Most people in this country have never been on strike. And telling them that you see them as a source of inspiration for your coworkers, and that you want to learn from what they're doing, and things like that, like being like, making the connection to the class struggle element, being a source of positivity. And also, when we first meet people on the picket line, we're not trying to sell them on DSA right away. Certainly we need to be recruiting people to DSA, especially working class fighters, but especially before you have a relationship with people, we're just being a good supporter. And especially for your union, also make sure that you're telling people that you are in a union and you want to, model yourself after them. So then after you go to the picket line and talk to people, you need to follow up on these relationships that you've built. You can't follow up and do all this other stuff if you haven't made those relationships in the first place. So you should be asking people's names. You should remember their names. You should maybe get their phone number or their social media handle, take a picture with them, take a selfie with them, text them later, message them later, say, oh, it was so nice to meet you on the picket line today. Oh, here's a picture of us that my friend took. When's your next picket? When do you need people? Is there anything I should bring? Do you need water? Would you like to come to our DSA meeting to talk about your strike and how we can help and what it means to you? really doing that follow-up over and over and over again is what we need to collapse the gap between the labor movement and the socialist movement. Sixth is be proactive and offer support in supplies or actions. So again, a lot of unions don't really know what to ask for. Like if you say, oh, I'm a community supporter, what would you like me to do? They may not really have an idea of what to say. They might say, donate to our solidarity fund or something. They might not have a solidarity fund or have even thought about creating one. They might say, will come to our rally, but they might not. Maybe they haven't planned a rally. Maybe they didn't think to do that, like a community support rally. So the more you can have an idea of the things that your chapter is able to provide and make suggestions, the more successful that will be. Then sometimes when we're at the picket line, tricky situations come up. And so we need to be prepared to defer to the wishes of the rank and file. Here in Portland, you know, there were a lot of really tense but great agitational moments on the picket line where people were, you know, blocking vans of scabs and deliveries and things like that. And that was wonderful. And workers were really got on board with that. They were very happy to see that the community was so behind them, you know, willing to literally step in front of a bus for them. But when does that ever happen to you, right? But sometimes there's a difference of opinion on certain things on the picket line, or even what to do or who to include. And so this is difficult, but when those disagreements or difficult situations come up, we really want to defer to what rank and file workers feel. And that might mean pissing someone off, or it might mean doing something that you feel disappointed by, but that's where we have to orient to, because they're the ones that are being brave and making, you know, the choice to go on strike. Then we need to think about DSA's special role. So a lot of people, even in the labor movement, aren't aware of this dynamic, but people outside of a union, even if you yourself are a union member, if you're not in the union that's going on strike or doing the campaign, you can do things that they are prohibited from doing because of stupid repressive labor laws. So for example, one reason that we as Portland DSA members were able to like block deliveries and block scab vans was because if union members did it, they might get an injunction against them, but they didn't participate in that. It was just us. We were totally free to do that as long as the rank and file members were on board and weren't going to get pissed off at us for doing that. And so we had tons of freedom to help them in ways where they were handicapped by the law. And then finally, get on the inside, get a union job. Strike support cannot end with being outsiders as socialists. We have to be insiders too. And the greatest example of that is the strike solidarity campaign that Portland DSA is doing right now with DCTU, the District Council of Trade Unions, which represents city workers in Portland. And the reason we were connected to that strike campaign was because of DSA member Alex Piero, who is a rank and file member of that union, and saw that we were doing stuff with other unions and said, hey, my union might go on strike soon. We should help and prepare and do community rallies and things like that. And none of this campaign that we're doing right now, which has lasted for weeks now and has built this incredible relationship between DSA and this union, none of that would have been possible without just that one person on the inside, that one socialist saying, hey, the socialist movement, DSA, needs to be connected to this strike campaign. So if at all possible, get a union job and connect your union with the socialist movement. So those are my big tips.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura. All right, and now we're going to have Jesse Dreyer speak. He's a UPS package handler and Teamster. He's active in the recent victorious National Teamsters United slate election. He was a daily participant in the Nabisco Strike. He was in the Fred Meyer and City Workers Strike Prep. He's a social media wizard. You should follow his Twitter and his TikTok. He's an at-large member of the Portland DSA Steering Committee, and he's a member in the Organize for Power and Reform and Revolution caucuses of Portland DSA. So here's Jesse.
Everybody. I'm here to talk a little bit about like our just anecdotes from these like experiences on the picket line. You know, Jonah has gone into like, you know, a bit of the analytics of like, you know, what was Striketober. Laura has gone into like, you know, the kind of like concrete details like of how to, you know, get involved in labor campaigns as DSA, but I'm just here to tell some stories and have some fun. I think that like, you know, the biggest campaign we undertook in the last year, obviously, is the Nabisco Strike, which lasted 40 days here in Portland on 100 Northeast Columbia Boulevard. This is a plant that hadn't struck since 1969. So there was only one rank and file worker named Sharon, who had been involved in both strikes. And, you know, she was a lovely connection of history that like, you know, we got to interact with quite a lot on the picket line. And I really want to credit like the development of that relationship with, you know, our labor czar, Jamie Partridge, who, you know, the first day of the strike, you know, just like meandered on down to 100 Northeast Columbia Boulevard with a bowl full of fruit, you know, which eventually gave him the nickname from Donna Jo Marks, a leader of the strike at Nabisco, the man who bore fruit. And he really kind of like, you know, solidified that relationship by being there day one and saying like, hey, how can we help? And another way that happened was, you know, just developing relationships with the rank and file leadership of BCTGM 364. In fact, you know, Mike Burlingham, who was the vice president at the time, has recently been elected the secretary treasurer of BCTGM 364. And in the process of our strike support, we actually won him to DSA. So we are doing both unionism and electoralism simultaneously, folks. But I think that like the most like, you know, important aspects of the Nabisco strike for how DSA could help was pressuring, you know, in loving ways, the union to, you know, kind of like expand its external operation. And the first of which was like actually putting forward like, you know, an external strike fund, one that the public could donate to. And, you know, we kind of like badgered leadership then to be like, hey, where can we donate to the strike fund? Hey, where can we donate to the strike fund? We want to donate to the strike fund. Please let us give you money. Please let us give you money. And eventually they started a GoFundMe after all that, like, you know, concerted pressure. And it was one of the most successful strike funds that we have, you know, as DSA have helped launch in recent memory. The Portland Locals Strike Fund raised over $90,000. And it also inspired the other BCTGM locals across the country to open up external strike funds. And through that, I think that there was over like $160,000 to $180,000 total raised from the public to help maintain these workers in their struggle. And it was essential because the Portland workers, they walked off first of all the Nabisco strikers, and they were out the longest for 40 days straight. So these like extra $100 to $200 per member payments that came from this strike fund were essential in maintaining like their strength on the picket line. And I also want to talk about like, you know, how elevating people's struggle through, you know, a common medium like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, etc., really helps rank and filers see that their struggle is like, you know, something that other people care about, because it's really lonely on the picket line, especially a 24-hour one like the Nabisco line. You know, you might see a weekly rally that Portland DSA organizes on a Saturday, but, you know, not everyone's out there at 2 a.m, you know, holding the line like they are. But seeing the kind of like dramatic support that can come from, you know, these like viral posts that can come out of these situations. And I want to kind of talk about how practically how we came about that. Basically just by finding a lot of like, you know, labor mutuals on Twitter, we were able to create these networks that could signal boost the content of, you know, striking workers, whether that be the strike fund, whether that be photographs or videos from the strike line, whether it be videos and pictures of actions. This kind of content, like, you know, is very popular in DSA circles, and DSA, as unfortunate as it is extremely online. So it is an easy way to kind of like boost that struggle by pushing out content from the strike line itself into national DSA networks. And Jonah was a great help for this because of his like, you know, national profile as a labor notes reporter. And, you know, so many more DSA members, many of who are on the call who are not in Portland, also helped to signal boost that content. And I can't thank you all enough for the work that you did in that. You know, a little simple act of retweeting, you know, it might not seem like much, it might not seem like organizing, but it really meant the world to all of these workers, seeing how far and wide their struggle erupted beyond, 100 Northeast Columbia Boulevard, how it touched Danny DeVito's heart to, create the slogan, no contracts, no snacks, which again, just echoed and echoed and echoed throughout the country. As for the TikToks, they're pretty unfortunate. They're kind of cringe. It's okay. It's just about getting something out there that people can share and put out. I thank Trey Cook for being my Generation Z kind of guy to lay the critique of cringe on my TikToks, but that's fine. It's just trying to make me be better on that. But other stories of how we were able to actually come out and support these workers. Day one, you're not going to be able to convince rank and filers for you to come out and block deliveries. Like Laura's article and Laura's slideshow says, we have to build up that level of trust and respect between kind of these two forces, between DSA and the local. So day one for Nabisco, we couldn't do what we were doing day 35. Day one, fruit, mutual aid, supporting with material aid to the strike line. And as we kind of develop those relationships, we can be like, hey, we're not members of VCTGM 364. We can we can kind of get in the way of some of these vans of scabs that are coming in to run the factory. We can do a lot of stuff. And so I remember our first action with that. My car broke down in front of the Nabisco gates, and I spent a good hour and a half trying to figure out which way the lug nuts go to fix my wheel. And I'm really not a good driver, so I just couldn't figure out which way those lug nuts went. I waited until they actually called the physical Portland Police Bureau to remove me, and others who were there. And this was an inspiration to the rank and filers. They were so stoked to see this happening, because initially they thought, whoa, hold up, this guy's in trouble. They tried to rush in to help, and I was like, whoa, hold on. Let me do my bit here. And soon after this action was when the workers took it on themselves to reach out to the railroad union and stop the trains, because the Nabisco plant has a freight line that comes in to drop off flour and sugar and other base materials. And seeing that initial action externally gave them the confidence and militancy to literally stop freight trains from coming into the facility, and it absolutely crippled Nabisco's ability to actually produce scab snacks. A fantastic, development that Railroad Workers United, a cross caucus of railroad workers and all the railroad unions, eventually made an excellent tweet that got a lot of attention as well. No contracts, no snacks, flour and sugar stays on the tracks. And just simple action like that led to more worker militancy and a gaining of confidence of these workers to take action themselves. And, any organizer's job is to create more organizers. And to touch back on something that Jonah said in his, intro, every single strike is going to impact everyone who participates in it to become more involved in the union and be a lifelong class fighter. Many of my business agents in Teamsters Local 162 were leaders. They were on the 1997 strike line for UPS, and they are absolutely 100%, union militants from that action to this day. And, it's really inspiring to see that, because, many of those guys, I like to say I do a lot of labor stuff. My business agent, he's done more for workers with his thumb and forefinger than I've done in my entire career. And that's because he was on that picket line in 1997. He became inspired to continue on in the labor movement. And so our efforts in helping build militancy on that picket line is incredibly effective in creating lifelong labor warriors that will take this struggle to the next level. Because with every contract, with every strike, we're not just planning for that specific contract, we're planning for the next contract and the next strike. And we're building the framework through that confidence to actually wage longer and more effective struggles against our employers. That's all I really have. Like Isabelle said, if you want to follow me on TikTok or Twitter, it's at Bullshit Trick. If you want to get a job at UPS, also hit me up on Twitter, please. It's kind of my thing. But yeah, if you want to help build up labor movement, that's a great way to start. Thank you so much for your time. Check.
All right, thank you, Jesse. So now we're gonna have some time for the panelists here to discuss, and then we will start having a Q&A session. So go ahead, panelists.
Do we want to just open it up for questions, maybe? Have people raise their hands?
Sure. So for the questions, if everyone wants to, who has a question, raise their hand. If you're on a phone, you press #9 to raise your hand. To unraise your hand, you do the same thing. I have one question first, though. Someone direct messaged me with a question, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that one first. This is from Jenny and Riley. They said, how much time did folks spend on the strike support per person? Just want to get a sense of how much time we should putting aside for this work.
I think it depends how involved you are. I think to make it, like, if the strike campaign, or even a non-strike, contract campaign, or whatever other campaign a union is doing, if it seems like it's really big and going to be a major battle in your area, and it's something you want to go all in on, you're going to need to have one or two bottom liners that make this like kind of their primary project, ideally. But of course, you should have as many people as possible in your chapter participating on a much less intensive basis, like just coming to rallies. But I don't know, I would say definitely at least, during the Nabisco strike, that's like all we did. That was like our main thing for like 40 days. That was a bit unusual, but I would say for people bottom lining it should be your primary project if you're really trying to make it a big thing. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Jesse would disagree. What do you think?
I think that it's variant based on your members' availability. I'm what you would call a different breed, I suppose, because I would get off of work every single day and go to the picket line and spend between 2 and 3 hours there because I work the preload shift at UPS, so I could just get off work and spend my whole day on the picket line. But I think this is a way where if your labor working group or your membership, if you're not large enough to have a labor working group, can there will be self-selecting leaders who will devote a lot of time to this, but just using your spoke access through DSA to kind of mobilize people to certain times at the picket line, that can be effective. I would say that hopefully maybe 4 or 5 hours per week per member would be good. But again, you will find those who are built different that will spend all of their free time there. So, cherish those people and, definitely deploy them as effectively as you can. Check. Yeah, Laura, yeah.
All right, we're going to take the next question from Sean.
Hey everyone, how are you guys doing? Thank you guys for putting this on. This is a fantastic panel and really great to hear some more stories about the great work you all are doing in Portland. I just had a question about the strike fundraising that you guys were talking about with the Nabisco strike. So since at what level has that been established at for you guys as a chapter? Was that kind of more of a one-off thing, or since Portland is sort of strike city right now, is this becoming more of a sustained pile of money that you guys have and continue to replenish? How is that working for you guys?
So the 2 times that we've done major fundraising, the first was for BCTGM, and that was a fund that their local started, but on our advice. Actually, same was true this time around with the City Workers Union. So both times it was, we encouraged that local to start a community solidarity fund because we were getting tons of people who were like, oh, I can't come to the rally, but I want to donate, link it to me. And people were just wanting to open their wallets to the union. And so we said, well, come on, guys, make a GoFundMe or something. And so finally they did. And that's where that came from. And so that all is with BCTGM. Same thing with DCTU. We encourage them to make a strike fund so that people who couldn't come could at least donate. And I think, as far as I remember, those are the only 2 times that we've done major fundraising. So it's really just putting it directly with the union. I think I've heard from national DSA people that that's preferable anyway because of, like, I don't know, weird rules about money and stuff.
Great, thank you, Sean, for that question. Now we're going to go to Mike D with Philly DSA.
Hi all, and first of all, just want to thank you all for putting on this panel. It's been really informative. In my chapter, the labor solidarity struggle in front of us right now isn't strike support per se. We have 4 hot Starbucks shops trying to organize underneath Workers United. And in hearing what you guys described, it seems like there's a lot of stuff to take over from, strike support over to organizing solidarity. But I just wondered if, are there differences in how you'd approach the 2 systems, or is it pretty much the same? We're in the planning stages for how to do this. So, any advice you could provide from your strike support experience would be appreciated. Thanks.
You want to take this one, Jesse?
Sure thing. We had 3 locations of Starbucks Workers United go public in Portland in the last month. And I would say that there's a lot of overages, there's a lot of crossover in how you approach the matter. When it comes to an ongoing organizing campaign, I do think it's a little different because you don't want to have your chapter play a substitutionalist role. Substituting the work of the organization for the work of those workers to organize themselves into a bargaining unit. But there are still plenty of ways to get yourself in the door in a sense to help out. One of the things that we've done is, we've created specific buttons of the logo that the Starbucks workers have made, much like DSA chapters, Starbucks Workers United or locals or unions or bargaining units have been making their own logos that have not been pushed out by Workers United as a specific button for themselves. So that's one area that you can donate some chapter labor and materials for, is pressing their designs as buttons and handing them out. Going into the store, ordering the Union Yes thing. If you have a worker organizer who's in there on their day off, it's really effective to have some of your active and engaged union members go in there and maybe sit down and have a discussion with them. It can make really good Twitter fodder. I made a tweet with Brother Dave, who's on the call right now, just in his Teamster battle jacket, doing some well, this is how we do with part-time work at UPS. I snapped a quick candid photo of that, and that generated a lot of interest and retweets, because it's a viral campaign. So there are ways that you can help in that end. Obviously putting on through your labor working group or your chapter more broadly, secrets of a successful organizer trainings, tailored for Starbucks workers, could be a good way to help as well. But again, one of the workers at Starbucks in the Beaverton area that organized is also a DSA member. And, Starbucks partners, they are key DSA demographics. They are typically young, they are typically politically progressive or politically socialist. They are, they have worked through the pandemic and want to get some revenge against the company. So it's also just a great recruitment opportunity to try to capture some of this energy for your chapter as well. But again, it's harder on an organizing campaign because you do not want the chapter to play a substitutionalist role. You want the workers to win the union themselves in that respect. But if Laura wants to come in and edit some of what I've said, please do.
Yeah, I agree with that. To me, the biggest difference, those are definitely good. The biggest one for me is timeline. Strikes don't usually last very long, and sometimes they never end up happening, even if they're voted on and authorized, right? And I think even the longest period of time we've spent working on a strike campaign was 40 days, or then I think there was like 4 or 5 weeks that we worked with OFNHP, a healthcare union that again didn't even end up going on strike. That was just preparation. That's not that long, but unionization campaigns can take a very long time. You know, there's like elections or, you know, contested, and then you redo the election, and then you have a contract campaign. It's like, it's very protracted. So I would just say for strike support, it's important to like jump on that as soon as you can, like just be ready to do, you know, rapid response mobilization. Whereas unionization campaigns, you can plan for things more on a, like just on a longer timeline, like doing trainings for them, like Jesse was saying, or other things.
Perfect. And now we're going to go to Gabriel Herbs.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I thought the panelists did a really good job talking about how the strike support is a really important tool for external organizing, recruiting class struggle warriors to our chapters. I'm curious to hear from the panelists on the impact of the strike solidarity as it pertains to internal organizing. Did it have a significant impact on dynamics within the chapter, et cetera? Thank you.
It's funny you ask. I was just talking to the co-chair of Detroit DSA this morning about that, Anthony. And I think, honestly, one of the biggest successes from the work we've done has been the internal component. I know that a lot of chapters are feeling kind of a slump right now. I know that a lot of chapters have struggled since Bernie's loss. And, you know, there are some chapters that have a lot of energy around electoral campaigns and have elected a lot of socialists to office, and that's cool. But not every chapter has that going on. A lot of chapters are struggling to find a good campaign to mobilize people around. And fortunately, strike support is not controversial at all. And at least as far as I can tell in our chapter, I don't think it should be controversial of activity for socialists. And it's something everyone tends to enjoy. Like, it's great to help people win on a very short timeline. Like, people just really want to do this stuff. It's great to be to be on the class struggle battlefield, and you learn so much, gain so many new relationships. It is something to really unite people around. That's like, again, a campaign that you can feel like you were part of winning, again, on not a super long timeline. And so I think for chapters that are struggling to find a unifying activity like that, strike solidarity, you should definitely do the research that Jonah was talking about earlier to see like what can you do in the labor movement, and especially like mapping your own members in your chapter. You know, where are your own members already in the labor movement? Is it healthcare? Is it education? You know, how can that be connected to certain campaigns that pop up?
To speak on the internal dynamics on how this has affected, like, you know, an internal chapter business, I think that invariably in any organization, conflicts are going to arise between members, specifically on, like, you know, political divisions that exist within the chapter. One lovely thing about orienting to a fight against, you know, capital more broadly, labor v. the boss, is that it unifies everyone in the fight against the boss. You know, as part of the work that I've done in trying to build up, like, you know, a solid force of people at UPS, it has been a cross-tendency success. You know, people of 3 distinct caucuses are a part of my little Teamster cadre, all working together because we know that, like, you know, whatever petty political differences that may exist in the chapter, when we're in the workplace, we're entirely unified in our struggle against the boss. And I would say that, like, that's a really unifying element of the work. You know, Portland has, you know, had its own internal fractures over the past period. And, you know, it's not to say that, like, you know, the strike support has covered those up, but it has allowed people to work more conscientiously with one another for a campaign that is meaningful and has truly impacted the lives of our members, probably than anything that we have engaged in previously. So I would just say that, like, you know, internal dynamics in any organization can be fractious, can be frayed. these kinds of actions and this kind of work is incredibly unifying.
I agree with all of that. Nothing gets people together like chanting. All right, and Harrison Warner, we have a question.
Yes, hello. I just wanted to ask about how are we seeing strike support have knock-on effects to other areas of like DSA organizing, or like how we're seeing how we're turning workers towards a democratic socialism as a movement in kind of concrete terms. What are the concrete examples of our relationship with these unions so far?
Well, I'll give my favorite example that has developed from the work we've done. So we worked with OFNHP, which is again a healthcare union, for a few weeks before their strike was planned, like before their strike happened, but it didn't happen. They got a TA at the last minute, which often happens. But even not having spent a single day with them on the picket line, just having done this incredible, intense preparation, you know, planning like picket line shifts and doing other actions of, you know, lobbying and all this other stuff to support them, and going to their meetings and telling them we supported them and how much their strike meant to us and all this kind of stuff. That resulted in the OFNHP leadership voting to give Portland DSA $10,000. And they did so explicitly with the rationale that they give too much money to the Democratic Party and they should give some to DSA because we actually help them, which is like, that's crazy. That's incredible. I've never heard something like that ever happen before. I've never heard of a union giving that level of a donation, any donation, let alone $10,000 to a DSA chapter. And their rationale behind it is the most incredible part, like truly beautiful, because it's starting us off on the path to an independent party for the working class, because we have workers organized, being powerful and saying, oh, we need independent political action even outside the workplace. And we recognize socialists as the agents of that political action. Like, whoa, that is so cool. And I don't think that'll be the last time that happens.
All right, and then we have Heather here.
Hi, this has been really great, and thank you everyone for putting it on. I was just wondering, since we're talking about how great this has been for the chapter, what your labor branch looked like before you started the strike support work and what it's looking like now, because it sounds to me like there's a lot more energy. But if you could just give me a little bit of a clearer picture, since every chapter is in a very different place.
If I might, you know, before Nabisco, our labor working group met once a month, and, you know, there was a change in leadership in like, you know, April or so of last year. And there was just this kind of like, you know, building of a machine, because we, you know, a perspective of one part of the chapter was like, we need to be orienting to labor more effectively. So a lot of people who are, you know, very committed, you know, a lot of people, particularly in the Organized for Power caucus, apologies to get too partisan here, at an event organized by that caucus, you know, we wanted to build a machine in labor that was going to be, you know, responsive and effective. And after the Nabisco strike, you know, going from having one meeting a month and like one mixer a month, you know, Labor Jeopardy, which is good fun and everyone should try that because it is very competitive and good Lord, it brings out the worst in people, myself included. We went to having 3 meetings per month, 2 business meetings and a labor mixer, so that we're meeting more regularly, updating people on like, you know, the kind of struggles in our own shops and the struggle more broadly in Portland, taking on the kind of like mapping element that Jonah brought up earlier today, as well as, you know, cohering in a way that we can actually put on more external based events like a socialist job fair again. Before the pandemic, you know, we had done socialist job fairs, and, you know, during the kind of like, you know, year and a half previously within the pandemic, you know, we had a large, like, you know, like the chapter basically shut down, right? It was all online. It's very hard to get in person and like, you know, discuss things. But, you know, as we've been kind of building up our confidence, and like, numbers have gone up and down. We've been more willing to prepare for like, in-person external events, like, we were able to do a labor mixer out in the park one day. We're going to put on this socialist job fair in like May of this year, if all things go effectively and well with the numbers and stuff, so that we can actually like, try to embed more of our members in the local labor movement in key sectors. And maybe Laura wants to expand upon what I've talked about for our labor working group.
Yeah, our labor working group, I think, has been one of the best parts of our chapter for a long time. But one big reason for that was because we did the Secrets of a Successful Organizer trainings. Like that was actually one of, like, I would say kind of the main thing that we did for a long time. But that was great. So if you're not familiar, Secrets of a Successful Organizer is a book published through Labor Notes, where Jonah works. And they have like a training manual, basically. So if you read the book and know the curriculum, you can do a training on it. And we got trained by Mark Brenner, one of the authors of the book. He's actually around Portland, so we knew him. And yeah, we would just do regular trainings on the curriculum, like identifying coworkers' issues and identifying leaders and an escalating campaign and that sort of thing. And that was, I think, really valuable. We still do that. And I would say that is a really good thing to be doing for other chapters who don't have like an active labor campaign that they're orienting to. Putting on regular secrets trainings is a great way to sort of, keep things running in between, moments of class battling.
All right, and we have Jamie Partridge.
All right, thanks so much to all the panelists. And just to follow up on the Labor Notes, Labor Notes is offering quite a few trainings now during the pandemic. They do secrets trainings. They do, how to transform your union, how to supercharge grievances, all kinds of different wonderful trainings. Just go to labornotes.org/events and you can see what they've got. I wanted to comment on a couple different things that have come up as a main participant in all these strike support efforts in Portland. The importance of the strike fund was really different in Nabisco than it has been with the city workers. With the Nabisco strike, we raised so much money through the strike fund that the strikers were able to double their weekly strike benefit. So it really gave them the confidence, in being able to pay the rent and survive a long strike, in which, had some bearing on the fact that they voted down the tentative agreement, even though the rest of the country voted in, and they ended up ending the strike. But in the situation of city workers, they have figured out that a lot of small donations to their strike fund can be seen by the city council, the decision makers, as basically a community petition in support of them. It's kind of like having hundreds of small donors to an electoral campaign, being able to say, look, there's all this support. Also wanted to just comment on the question of how strike support impacts the internal dynamics of certainly our chapter. We have had a lot of internal division, especially coming out of the 2021 National Convention, and there's a lot of debates, about what the appropriate approach to the working class should and is, and bringing people, from all the different tendencies within our chapter to the picket line to talk in person with the strikers. And my emphasis is always praise people for taking this bold, courageous step and modeling for us how to fight. Like, you are showing us how to fight. And then then, what Laura and I did was we had a radio show and we did a lot of interviews. And so we got a lot of stories and we asked people to speak at the rallies, and having the workers tell their stories at the rallies was really inspirational to our members, to DSA members who are like, trying to figure out how to intersect with, regular working class people who are in struggle. And in that sense, I just think it's a wonderful vehicle for uniting chapters, DSA chapters.
Thank you, Jamie. And we can go to Jonathan K.
Hey, so one of the really inspiring aspects of our chapter's work in strike support recently has been like winning over members of the unions that we support into joining us in struggle as DSA members. I think that's like really historic. And my question for those who've been building those relationships directly is, how do you balance, raising socialist perspectives and not hiding our politics against not talking over the workers or having us be seen as like way out of touch with consciousness?
That's a really good question. It's tough to balance because, the strike is so meaningful. And so I want to explain exactly like why it's meaningful in the way that makes sense to me and as a socialist and as a Marxist. But I think we have to find the way of talking about it that's accessible to people who don't go to 10 DSA meetings a week. But I don't think that's difficult because it really is not that hard to understand. The way that I talk to people about it is like, you're showing people that you have to pick sides. We're not on Nabisco's side. We're on your side. Talk about that we know that we can't win things for the working class unless you fight, unless you take risks. And by going on strike, you're taking a risk. I think that some parts of socialist politics and Marxist politics can take study to understand, but I think that a lot of how strike and labor activity connects to our politics as socialists and Marxists is not difficult to understand, and we just have to be practiced in explaining it in ways that don't sound like weird, ways that make sense to people. I'd be curious actually to hear Jonah's thoughts on this, on balancing like talking about socialist politics and also like relating with people on the picket line.
Yeah, I mean, I've just been listening because you all are doing the actual work in Portland, so it's been great to hear that. But I would just say, I mean, that question just makes me think how important it is to emphasize that people's consciousness is not fixed. There's this great book, I forget what it is, like Marty Glaberman is writing about the steel strikes in the 40s or something like that, where like 1 in 5 steel workers went on strike that year. And there was this survey done like in the 6 months preceding it that was like, I would never go on strike. And, everyone, this is like the majority opinion is like, I don't strike as a steel worker. And in 6 months, everyone's on strike. People change in these fights. They have opinions that they'll say what they are. I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat. I just think you have to sort of be open to the idea that someone's going to be all messy with what they're saying about themselves and what they think of politics and the mix of things that we're fed, especially working class people are fed random TV and podcasts and YouTube and weird shit. But I think showing up and being there is like part of the thing I'm saying about like unions have been dismantled, working class institutions have been dismantled, is that a lot of this stuff is just totally up for grabs for most people. They just wake up and pick an ideology for the day like a breakfast cereal because there's no organization to be a member of or a fight to be a part of. And a lot of the time it's like, it's how you have like really Trump supporting people in the unions and being a shop steward. How can that happen? It doesn't make sense on paper, but it's because they're sort of having a mix of ideas of what fights they're involved in and who's willing to fight for the thing they care about. So I just think on paper, it's a big question. It's a big theoretical problem. In practice, in a lot of cases, people will continue coming to the meeting with you if you were there for their fight, and they just want to stay in conversation and relationships. So it's really, a lot of this stuff is relational. It's a big institutional question, but on the level of the strike, it's like, were you there? Did you show up? Do you care? Do you support the thing I care about?
I wanted to come in on this as well, because it's just part of a broader question about like, how does mass consciousness change? And mass consciousness changes through traumatic, intense events. And a strike is a traumatic, intense event for these workers in their lives. If we look back to history, we right now in Portland DSA, we're doing a study group on one of my favorite books of all time, Teamster Rebellion by Farrell Dobbs. You can still sign up for that if Jamie wants to put in the link right quick for our final session on February 16th. Farrell Dobbs emerged as a leader of the coal workers in Minneapolis, having previously, in the previous election, voted for Herbert Hoover in front of FDR. And, it shows that just in 2 years, going from 23 being a Hoover supporter to being 25, being a, socialist leader of workers in a, general strike in Minneapolis, it goes to show that. But there's also a contemporary example I want to bring up. On the Nabisco picket line, there was, one of the most militant guys who would go in the middle of the street and, honk these like giant air horns that he had with a big boycott Nabisco sign. He was, a guy that's like pretty pilled, honestly. He was, trying to tell me to go on to BitChute and look up this stuff about the vaccines being, horrible, Bill Gates propaganda technology and, QAnon adjacent. But he was still, when the chips were on the table, he knew what side he was on. He wasn't going to scab. He wasn't going to walk back in and betray all of his fellow workers. He was going to be out there in the middle of the street honking his horns. And so, we engaged in a lot of patient and calm dialogue with him about yes, Bill Gates making a lot of money off this vaccine. That's absolutely true. But if you can bring up a concrete example that's from someone that they trust and respect, that's a major way to pull them out of that track that they're on towards more anti-working class conspiracy thinking. Just saying if it's supposed to be a population control measure, why aren't they doing it why aren't they giving out this vaccine all the way in poor countries? Why aren't they expanding this to everywhere else? Why is it going to the rich countries first? Just trying to put it into a class formula versus putting it into this weird conspiratorial angle. But workers' consciousness due to the dismantling of the labor movement, due to the dismantling of class politics in this country, has led to a very idiosyncratic perspective amongst the broader working class. And if we patiently and calmly struggle alongside people who have bad ideas or incorrect thinking, we can have an impact on shifting them towards the correct or better perspective than they currently have. Shifting away from no consciousness, not exactly towards class consciousness necessarily, but in that middle path towards trade union consciousness. That's a material effect that we can have on these rank and filers by just struggling alongside them patiently and calmly and non-judgmentally. So, that's what I wanted to talk about, how mass consciousness changes, and that consciousness might not be so mass in the kind of temporal and regional area of a picket line, but it can have a major impact afterwards as they prepare to engage in broader struggle. Because not only did we tell these workers, we're out here for you, we got them to commit to be out there for us later. If UPS walks out, they said they'll be there. If DCTU walks out, they said they'll be there. Kaiser almost walked out, and they were at every single pre-strike rally. So just calmly and patiently struggling alongside people who have, incoherent or incorrect ideas. As long as they're engaged in struggle, they are movable. Check.
All right, so everyone, Jonah had to leave. He had to go put his baby to bed, but we can take the next question from Brian Denning.
Thank you. I really appreciate this panel. I wanted to ask, one of the things you were mentioning was about Jonah mentioned was about class formation, and I think there's been a lot of discussion about community support that's been great here. One thing I think I'd love to hear about, if anyone would be willing to speak on this, is, Nabisco was an example of a company that was trying to offshore a lot of jobs or threatening to offshore jobs against the workers there. And initially in the Nabisco strikes, there were signs about, we should boycott Mexico or kind of blaming Mexican workers. I thought, there's Russell Lum was on this call as a representative of Jobs with Justice and as a person who's also a Teamster. He did a great speech early on in the Nabisco strike. I want to just flag about international solidarity, but I wondered if anybody would be willing to speak on that subject about the importance of like how that could affect the strike and the people on the strike there, including people who might have otherwise been ready to kind of blame workers elsewhere for their troubles. Check.
Yeah, and I understand why people feel concerned about seeing like the America First messaging. I certainly don't like that. But I understand like where that comes from. I think for a lot of the BCTGM members, that wasn't necessarily like an anti-immigrant sentiment. It was, them speaking to like a real material thing that happens in their industry, which is that jobs go to Mexico because they're cheaper there for the employer. And like, I don't think it's good to talk to workers by leading with, yeah, but that sounds racist. I don't think that that's going to do a lot of good in getting them to think a bit more deeply about that. I think that's going to turn people off and make it seem like, okay, well, you don't actually get what is going on with me in this industry. So what we did was when we held rallies for Nabisco workers, we talked about how we felt about that, and I think that translated to a common sort of qualifier that I heard multiple people make, including BCTGM leadership on the picket line, which was to say they would make an effort to say, and I believe that people all over the world, that Mexicans and everyone deserves a good paying job, but it is Nabisco's fault for exploiting people this way and for not respecting their workers here. And we need to fight for our livelihoods. And I think taking an opportunity to redirect the blame to the employer, right? Always putting the blame on the boss, right? Always, always, always is so good in this kind of circumstance and very effective. And honestly, even the people I spoke to on the line who had that sort of American First messaging on their picket signs, when I talked about the issue with them, and I said, yeah, and it's so awful that those workers in Mexico are even, they make even less. God, that's so awful that Nabisco gets to exploit them like that. They would say, yeah, I know, it's terrible. Like they don't actually disagree, even if some of the messaging around that seems off-putting. Like, I think we have to remember that people are capable of seeing nuance. They're not idiots. And so this is an example of how socialists can be a positive presence without being like scolding, essentially.
An interesting aspect of the Nabisco strike more broadly was the international solidarity that developed throughout the campaign as well. Workers in Bisquimeto, Venezuela, were also engaged in struggle against the parent company of Nabisco, Mondelez, which is the banner that they were operating under in Venezuela. And these workers reached out to the Nabisco strikers because they were so touched by, the lead and militancy that they were showing against this company that has also been horribly exploitive to them, in Venezuela. It was not just like, in Latin and South America that struggle was taking place on as well, though. Mondelez operates facilities all across the world, and there were Australian workers with the Bakers Union in Australia
that also were taking action soon after the Nabisco strike ended. And they utilized like the kind of like, long, the banner head of like, what would have been happening in the United States, in Portland, Chicago, Richmond, Denver, et cetera, to help wage a struggle against Mondelez in Australia, similar to how they waged that struggle against Mondelez in Venezuela. And, we were trying to use like the kind of like AFL solidarity houses that exist internationally to like, hopefully get some, more consciousness and movement at the Mexican plants, the two that were operating there in like Monterrey and I forget where the second one was, but it's just such a struggle. But seeing like, the kind of like recent updates on labor in Mexico, like the independent General Motors Union that just arose, I'm sure that like, kind of by relaying the experience of Nabisco in Portland, Chicago, Richmond to the Mondelez workers in Mexico could be another way to like, build up that international solidarity that exists. Check.
All right, so it looks like there's no more questions. Is there anything that Jesse or Laura, you guys want to add before we're all done?
I'll just say I'm sorry Jonah had to leave. But take care of kid is a great reason, and I'm so glad that Jonah was here. I value his reporting so much, and to sum it up, I would say get a union job and go to the picket line.
I wanted to end just with kind of like a plug of the work that we're doing in Portland DSA labor working group. Get a union job, obviously, as Laura said. Me and my fellow UPS worker, Nick Maripode, have written an article that will be published soon in my Ideological Caucuses magazine, Reform and Revolution, about like, the UPS, the IBT election broadly, and how we can like, orient the organization nationally towards like, a contract campaign at UPS. And if you're interested in, hearing that, please, get a subscription to our magazine as it comes out at reformandrevolution.org/subscribe. Thank you so much. Check.
And thank you to everyone for coming here today. We had a great meeting and thanks for all the questions.